The only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic. So, if what I say now seems to you to be very reasonable, then I'll have failed completely. Only if what I tell you appears absolutely unbelievable have we any chance of visualizing the future as it really will happen.
Hello, and welcome to Arthur C Clarke Presents metaFUTURES, an exploration of what the metaverse is and what it may mean for the world to come. I'm your host, Patrick Coleman, and along with the Arthur C Clarke Center for Human Imagination and the Origami Co., we're very excited to have you with us as we explore the limits of the possible when it comes to the metaverse. To begin our journey, if you want to follow me outside, we're going to get on an airship to our first destination.
Hello and welcome to the Earthrise. My name is Amy Winkler and I will be your guide today. Before we dive into our special guest that we have joining us today, I would like to just take a moment to recognize this beautiful ship that we are on right now called the Earthrise. The Earthrise was a tool that we created some time ago. It was actually the precursor to Afterville. This was one of our first builds as the Origami Co. If you direct your attention to the animation right behind you in the center of the room, you'll see an abbreviated breakdown of what we used the Earthrise for. We would invite our guests, our residents, and our advisors aboard this ship, and we would travel 8 years into the future to a place known as the Blockdown before Afterville. Each week, we would have our guests have discussions aboard this ship. Arguments, disagreements. We would talk about nature, culture, infrastructure. This ship has seen a lot of conversations, extremely fascinating topics, and it helped to build what Afterville is now today. Each phase, we would bring them in 1 week at a time, and we would discover new things about what we wanted to bring to the community of Afterville in 8 years into the future. And I would just like to take a moment to recognize this ship. It hasn't changed one bit. It is in its original form and it is beautiful. And to have a VR tool, a storytelling tool just like this at our access today, at our fingertips, is monumental, I believe. And it used to be just a blip of a thought, of an idea, and some of the virtual reality futurists that were born long before their time. That to just come up with an idea like this that we actually have access to now. And I would like to take that moment to say that our guest for today has had the opportunity to work alongside some of these extremely talented VR futurists. And I'm going to take a little walk over here. If you'll join me, we'll introduce to you Dr. Erik Viirre, who's had much experience in VR. Hello, Doctor. Well, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. And I would love to echo your comments about Earthrise. It's given me incredibly powerful and pleasant memory to be back on board. And I was super lucky to be part of the group that was invited to come to work here. And I see my colleague Patrick from our Clarke Center, and it was an amazing thing for me to come to work in virtual reality, especially during the pandemic. And I so look forward to our weekly scheduled meetups here where we talked and then we went into Afterville. So the Earthrise is an incredible, special, actual vessel to me. Yes, so thank you so much for you and all our colleagues, especially Joe and Trish at Origami Air. For being able to build this and bringing us in. Again, it's just a stunning, wonderful chance, and now get to tell a little bit of my story here.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Could you tell the folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a physician and a neurotechnologist. So have been doing brain research since I started in university in the 1980s, in the early 1980s. Um, and right now I'm a professor in the Department of Neurosciences at UC San Diego, where I see uh, people with inner ear problems, which is very much like some of the trouble that people experience in virtual reality. But the most fun is that I am also the director of the Arthur C Clarke Center for Human Imagination at UC San Diego. So I just have, again, just an incredible privilege to be the host of our center with all the amazing programs that we do around imagination, around science fiction, and we even have space flights and all kinds of fun. But one of the things that we do all kinds of work on is virtual reality.
That's fantastic.
So,
Fun stuff.
and
And you you
and
talk
thanks for
about
putting the pictures up here on the
oh
wall
yes.
of Arthur C. Clarke, who, as we remember, was an icon of the 20th century, who did all kinds of things. And you have the poster here. He invented the satellite. He invented the geosynchronous orbit, sometimes the Clarke orbit. And we see the cover of 2001: A Space Odyssey that he wrote the screenplay for Stanley Kubrick's movie. Um, and we see him on set there with on board the Odyssey. Um, but Clarke was so much more than 2001, and he was both a science fiction writer, but a science advocate. And incredibly, as with so many things, he anticipated the future. And in fact, in 1953, in his book Childhood's End, he made there's a little comment which essentially describes virtual reality, a totally interactive experience where people would go to movies. Remember, we didn't have computer screens in the 1950s, but he already anticipated that there would be a medium where we join in. And he said at the end of the quote, and I'll let you look it up. He says, "The prospect was dazzling, but it was also terrifying." And so
Oh, that's
I
great.
think that's certainly so. So for good and bad, we have to keep in mind about virtual reality and the possibility of it.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind every day when it comes to technology
Yes,
like
for
this
sure.
growing so fast.
Yeah.
Cool. You mentioned back there a little bit something about motion sickness in virtual reality.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that just a little bit more?
Sure. So, we've all experienced motion sickness, or many of us. A few are bulletproof, but almost everybody will get motion sick in some way. And we've had that feeling, in the back seat of the car when you've been reading the map or reading the book, and then you get that kind of queasy, and then sweaty, and then tired, and so lots of different things can uh, enact that in humans, activate it in humans, flying on planes or on boats, or as I say, in the backseat of the car, different vehicles. And so it's an interaction of motion, therefore motion, and then these feelings of illness. So of course, the fun part of virtual reality is what we're doing right now, moving around and interacting um,
Yeah.
with what we see created by the computers. But of course, that's something that we can, especially if we do a bad job with our displays or a bad job with our software, we can certainly induce motion sickness. So cyber sickness is an important uh, thing that we have to figure out. And in fact, we studied this 25 years ago on what were the factors. Some people have invoked latency, where the computer has to fast and build the pictures as we look around. But in fact, a far more important factor that we discovered in the 90s was uh, geometry. So in other words, what we see right now are nice, beautiful, straight, clear lines in our head-mounted displays, and mine is really great. It's kind of stunning to me that for something for a few $100s gives you this beautiful interactive experience. By getting the geometry correct with both the displays and the software, that's what gives us reduction of cyber sickness in virtual reality. So
Wow.
we wrote up this back in the 90s and studied this systematically in our laboratory.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I get motion sick in VR too. So I'm pretty excited about this technology and where it's going to go
Yep.
and how it can grow. Definitely, definitely.
Well, good.
Uh,
Well, we want you to, and so as we should here, we're so excited to talk about things. We go on and on and on. So we want to make sure we take a break and take a breather and have nice, cool,
yes.
fresh air and things like that too. So
Yep. Yep.
that's
Definitely,
for sure.
definitely try to
Yep.
promote breaks in VR for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and you also mentioned that you worked in VR. Could you elaborate on some VR projects that you worked on?
Well, so I've been mentioning this laboratory, and the laboratory that I'm talking about is the Human Interface Technology Laboratory at the University of
Yes. Yeah.
Washington. And I just had the super privilege of being able to be there with my mentor and friend, Dr. Tom Furness. And it was there at the Human Interface Technology Laboratory where I got to work in VR. It was just a stunning privilege. We worked on amazing things there, minimizing pain with VR, teaching kids in VR, our work on cyber sickness. And I got to, my special project was something called the virtual retinal display. And so
Cool.
right now we're looking at screens that, little screens with optics that we look at through the head-mounted display. What if we could create a picture a different way? What if we could paint a picture on the back of your eye and the retina of your eye using very carefully controlled light? Of course, that very carefully controlled light is laser light. And so here I see it. Here's
There's the
the eye
laser.
up on the wall, and we see the laser coming. And so this is kind of like, I don't know if you remember rock concerts in the before times, with laser light shows, painting big scenes on the screens, um, with high-powered lasers. But in fact, we can do the same thing in your eye, and it's like, whoa, isn't that what, lasers in the eye? Isn't that like awful? Isn't that like we're
Yeah.
gonna do some damage or something like that? In fact, my work was to literally examine this problem of, well, what if we had lasers go into the eye? Now we do lasers in the eye all the time for medical purposes, and it turns out that instead of the screens that we have, which send light all kinds of directions into the eye, if we use the laser scanner, we can put very precise amounts just in the right spot, just at the right time, and we use tiny amounts of light, controlled light, at very, very low power. And so Dr. Furness and his engineers built these displays, and we measured the power, and it's tiny, tiny, and we had beautiful pictures. And the idea will ultimately, instead of wearing these masks, we'll be able to have the real goggles, glasses frame, um, VR, kind of like we got the idea from with Google Glass, but instead of the little wee scene that we would see with Google Glass, or the scene that I see, this is about as wide as I see with VR right now, we would see all the way out here. So we would
Full
have
peripheral.
a laser scanning display with tiny amounts of light, computer controlled, carefully with safety monitoring, and see incredible images. And Dr. Furness built these devices, and as I say, I was super lucky to work with him and be part of the team where we measure the safety of this technology.
Yeah, that's
And
very cool.
I got to just say, hey, Amy, this is so awesome. Instead of death by PowerPoint, for you to put this whole presentation together for us with our laser light show, and I know you got a few other tricks up our sleeve,
Always.
but to be able to be here and have my first VR presentation, and where I get to talk about my own life and work, this is
Yes.
just like
Please,
so
please.
totally awesome.
And they're interactable. I highly recommend all of you come up and take a chance at getting some lasers shot right into your
That's
avatar's
right. That's
eyes.
right.
If you're brave
Yeah,
enough
yeah.
to do it, go ahead and stand in front of the eyeball.
All right. Here,
Um, Erik, if you
let's
want to
let those people
join me
come in.
over here, let them
Okay.
play with the eyeball. Just gonna
All
walk right
right.
through the people. And I want to ask you a question. I'm gonna find
Okay.
a little spot to stand here. You mentioned working with Tom Furness, and I've
Yes.
heard this story, and I'd like you to share it with these people here. How did you come about working with Tom Furness?
Well, again, a super privilege, um, where in the early 1990s, I read this novel by this preeminent science fiction writer whom I've been able to meet in person through the Clarke Center,
So
William
cool.
Gibson. And William Gibson wrote this novel called Neuromancer. And in it was the first instance of the use of the word cyberspace. And what Gibson was talking about was literally plugging your brain electronically into a computer. So not just using light like screens that we have and speakers, but jacking in, he called it. And if you plugged in, then you would enter this place called cyberspace and see all kinds of stunning and amazing things. And having worked on visual display systems, and in fact, even done brain implants for vision with people in my graduate work in the 1980s. I read this book and it's like, this is the thing. This is what I want to do in my career. So it turned out that on the back of the book, and I still have the original copy, it said that William Gibson was a science fiction writer and lived in Vancouver, Canada. And so I did something that we don't do anymore. I did something because we didn't have Google in the 1990s. I called up directory assistants. I don't know anybody who remembers directory assistants. Okay, if you remember directory assistants. All right, so you get somebody's phone number. What an idea, right? It's funny. I think it's harder now to get a phone number than it was with directory assistants.
It
It's
totally
still hard
is.
to get phone numbers.
Yeah.
I called up directory assistants and I said, give me all the phone numbers for William Gibson's in Vancouver. And so they did. And I started dialing for dollars. And I think it was the third phone call. I somebody answered, the guy answered, and I said, are you the William Gibson who wrote Neuromancer? He says, yes. And it's like, oh, well, I'm this crazy doctor, brain researcher in Canada. And can you tell me where in the world this kind of work might be really going on? He says, well, I heard about this new laboratory at the University of Washington. It sounds like they're doing this kind of stuff. So I started searching and calling, and I actually made 6 trips to Seattle and ultimately
Wow.
got to meet Dr. Furness and convinced him that I was a guy that he needed to hire. And so that was through directory assistance and William Gibson that I got my job with Tom
That's so
Furness
cool.
at UW and the HIT lab. So that was super
Uh,
fun.
I love that story. I love that story. It's so
Yeah,
cool. I can't do that anymore.
that's right.
Cool. And so you talk about neurotechnology and brain implants. Can we tell a story about some brain implants now? I think it's time to
Sure.
dive deep.
Well, I mentioned one already where I was doing work on uh, giving light experiences to people who are blind. And so the visual neuroprosthesis was a technology that was worked on in the 1970s and 80s. And we knew that if we gave small electrical stimulations to the back part of the brain, that people would experience light. This was for surgeries where people were having for epilepsy to control their epilepsy. And here we have this incredible brain virtual simulation. You can see the emitter in the back of the brain there in the visual part of the brain. And so if we do stimulation back there, people would see light. So that was an experimental technology, and I had a profound experience one day in the operating room where I was literally able to see a person, the visual part of the brain, kind of like this, but in an operating room, see their actual brain, and then walk around and talk to the person because they were awake having the surgery. Just sort of
Wow.
one of those profound experiences
Yeah.
and we worked on advancing the technology to give light experiences for people who had lost their vision. But right now we have a much more common and routine and amazing brain implant, something called the cochlear prosthesis. So the cochlea is the hearing organ, and for people with various diseases of that lose their hearing, but the hearing organ and the hearing nerve still work. So if we can electrically stimulate that hearing nerve, then people can have the experience of sound. So we do this. And this is for people who lose their hearing. And in fact, we can even do that for people for babies and children who are born without hearing. And in fact, a colleague of
Wow.
mine recently, their baby had a cochlear implant. And so tiny wires were implanted. So this is a surgery, and it's a big deal. And I know the mom for sure was worried, which I would be worried too for my baby. But this is something that's done thousands of times every year here in the United States and around the world. And I had the amazing discussion with my colleague who told us of the day when they had started turning the implant on and making sure that all the surgery had healed and things like that. And then he was with his baby and snapped his fingers from behind, and the baby turned for the first
Ooh.
time. So the baby couldn't see him, but the baby experienced the sound. And so again, a profound piece of technology that we have in our modern world for people with effects on their brain and their nervous system and their body.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's
So
crazy.
that again, awesome VR demo. We can't do that on a
Awesome view.
PowerPoint now, can we?
No.
So
No,
I
we
think we need to
cannot.
hear that alarm again. Can we do that one? So just imagine that you're a child that never heard a sound, and then you heard something for the
You guys are
first
good at
time.
pulling
What a
all that. Oh,
profound experience. What a profound experience.
that's
There's another one over
spatial.
there.
That's spatial.
There we
Knowing
go.
to
That's
look
right.
in a direction. That's the crazy part about it.
Yeah.
For
So
this next one, Eric's got
mhm.
another story about brain implants, but I would like to ask our avatar actor to come on down. He's gonna help us out with a bit of a demonstration while Eric tells his
Sure.
story.
So we have lots of other brain implants that are used these days. And very importantly, we again, thousands of people developed this condition you may have heard of called Parkinson's disease. And Parkinson's disease is super important. It affects people in a variety of ways, but mostly how they start to move. And they have a terrible trouble initiating movement. So they want to move, but their brain doesn't uh, allow that to happen. The changes that happen in the movement control part of their brain interrupts their ability to start the command to start moving. So as our avatar is showing here, he's trying to move. He's trying to move. So it turns out that if with certain drugs, we can help with that. But in fact, with another technology called deep brain stimulation, and again, we can kind of see with our model here, if we put a single electrode, a very thin wire, deep into the brain where the movement control part of the brain, um, the movement activation control part of the brain is, then the people with Parkinson's disease can start to move again. So our avatar now, they can show that they're moving, they have control over initiation of movements. And so again, here we are in VR, we get an experience, and ultimately we'll be able to show you with your own avatar what's it like when you can't move, and then what's it like when you can. And so that's, again, thank you so much. And again, brilliant thing for us to talk about here, Amy, how the avatar can't move, but then And you can imagine, all that frustration just when you're trying to move the mouse on your computer and the cursor doesn't move. And then
Yeah,
somehow it comes back.
definitely, definitely. Um, and so there's a bit of controversy when it comes to putting implants in the brain,
Well, that's right. And
isn't there?
in fact, in my career, I did work on the ethics of neurotechnology. And then you can imagine that me working on these kinds of things that I'm a cheerleader. This is the awesome stuff. We got to have these kinds of things. But the ethicists appropriately are asking us, well, what are the implications of this? What are the implications? How can we ensure equitable distribution of incredibly expensive technologies like this? You know, the insurance costs for a surgery for a brain implant, as you can imagine, are really a ton of money. So certainly not
Yeah,
everybody in our modern society, especially here in America, have the chance to have these kinds of technologies. So again, our goal is to be able um, to make it fair and equitable for everyone, and fairly ask the question: should we even start with these kinds of technologies and make them an offering? Um, and of course,
if
there
I
are all kinds of downsides to them as well. So you
sure,
have a neat
right?
poster over there with the Terminal Man, which is another novel, which tells us about an implant that gave trouble. Um, and in fact, my very first research was on brain stimulation and the side effects of these kinds of uh, uh, s- uh, technologies. Well, there's certainly, as you could well imagine, not just something that we would do. Let's have a Memorial Day and let's get a brain implant, right?
Right, right.
There are
Not
big
gonna do it
implications
willy-nilly.
for it. That's
Um,
right.
can I ask? Because you got to look at all the perspectives of getting a brain implant. It's a major surgery.
Yep.
There's implications, like you say. But what
Yep.
is in controversy and ethics? What is really the difference between getting a brain implant versus getting something like a heart implant, which we've been doing for so long, that's improved the longevity of our lives? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, so, and you and I talked about this before, where so pacemakers are, again, something that have been done hundreds of thousands of times. And so a small little electronic device is put into the chest to help people with abnormal heart rhythms. And here's the interesting thing, and I see these people with the abnormal heart rhythms, and there's kind of two basic flavors. One is where the heart is too slow. So the heartbeat is not fast enough. And so you kind of feel tired and don't have any energy. And in fact, even have kind of a mood like kind of like depression, right? Where you can't get going in the world. So with a too slow heart rhythm, the pacemaker, the implant, which again is a small wire that goes right into the electrical controlling part of your heart, then brings your heartbeat back to the regular old rate. And people feel better and more energetic. And then there's the opposite, where the heart beats too fast, the tachycardia. And we've all had that heart beating kind of sensation and the anxiousness, And in fact, people with tachycardia, with too uncontrolled high heart rates, also have that uncontrolled emotional feeling of anxiousness. By using heart rhythm controls with implants and bringing the heart rate down, again, their anxiousness, and they feel better and again able to interact with their usual selves back in the real world. So, so our challenge with these kinds of implants is how people um, experience them. How are they available? Um, we didn't talk about the cochlear implant, and as you know, there's a strong challenge in the uh, the the deaf community where some of them feel that they would rather not have their children here, but they want their children to be part of the deaf community. The deaf community has their own forms of communication. They don't use sound. They live their lives happily, and so they ask the question, well, why do I want this technological implementation for my child when I live in the world
Yeah, for
with
sure.
my community, and I am happy and engaged? Do I want my child to somehow change and different from me? And that's a profound question for all of us, as we look to um, our initiatives on diversity and equity and inclusion. Uh, Importantly, Arthur C. Clarke over there, we see him in the picture. He had polio, and in fact spent a lot of his time in a wheelchair. In fact, when I met him, he was in a wheelchair. What are the implications of using our technologies, our drugs, our devices to restore those kinds of functions? And so an
That's a good
important
question.
discussion, and of course that goes to virtual reality as well.
It does, yeah. I gotta, if you guys don't mind, I have a little story to tell of my own. I remember watching The Twilight Zone way back when, and it was the story of this society of people. It was this town or village, however you want to refer to it, of people that had implants directly put into their brain, so that it was like a computer chip. They could download any information at any given point, and they were just everyone was equally smart, right? Except there was one man in town that his brain didn't quite react well to the chip, so he couldn't have a chip implanted in his brain. And so he was considered, the village idiot, essentially. But he really wanted to be as smart as everybody else, could immediately download all this information. And so he studied. He had every book that could ever be written. He learned, he educated himself. He tried so hard to be as smart as everyone else. And then one day there's this like weather storm, that an electrical outlet, and it fries every chip of every person that's in town. And all of a sudden, everyone that went from being able to download all this information immediately can't think of anything. They don't have any knowledge. They've never been educated. They immediately go from having this chip in their brain to nothing. And the village idiot, once upon a time, is now the smartest man in town, and he has to educate all of these people and bring that knowledge back up. And ever since I saw that episode, I swore I would never get a brain implant or a computer chip put in my brain, because I am not going to go through the whole technological glitches that happen with it.
Well, there you go.
So my question to you is, would you ever get a brain implant?
Would I ever get a brain implant? Well, that's a big question. Oh, and we're having a little glitch in the universe here. Oh my goodness. All of a sudden, all I see is gray tones. Color has gone away for me. And so, of course, for people, this is kind of like what people experience who are colorblind. They don't see the nuances of color. Interestingly, our avatars are still full color. So we can see that the world is now um, like Mary in the black and white room. We talked about this before. What
Yes,
happens
yes.
if the world changes and we lose some of our sensory abilities? So would I have a brain implant? Well, depends kind of on two things. Well, what is that brain implant like? And then the other is, what would it do for me? So the answer is yes, for certain kinds of brain implants for certain kinds of things. And so I wouldn't have a brain implant that went all throughout my brain. I would
Sure,
think that would
sure.
be too dangerous and worrisome and very invasive and destructive to my brain. And so I would say that the risk of that. So if I could have a brain implant that was just one wire, yeah, I
What
would do
would it
that. And we
be?
saw this already. We saw our Parkinson's person. We've talked about the cochlear implant. Interestingly, the people with loss of vision, they would need multiple wires implanted to be able to see or experience light. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that I'm kind of like in the room here where I'm seeing things in gray tones, but then I could get a superpower. But what a superpower
Which
would
ability
I do
would
a
you
brain
get?
implant? So I would probably do a one-wire implant for a superpower. So what
What's
superpower
the
would that
superpower?
be?
What's the superpower?
Well, I think what I'd like to have is four-dimensional vision. If I could have
Whoa.
4D, I could see in four dimensions, and that I would seriously think about that.
I
So
think that
for
might be
medical
a whole new
conditions, yeah, I'd have
science.
an implant, but for a superpower, I would have to think about it. So seeing in 4D. So 4D to me would be kind of like going from the black and white gray tone world back to full color. Q, do we get to go back to full color now? Can we have it back? uh, Waving our hands. Joe's pointing us to come over here. Oh, I have to come over here. Is that right? Uh-oh. Here it is. It's coming back. Oh, by coming back, yay. Oh, thank goodness.
I want
So,
to direct one
with
little question to the audience here today.
uh-huh.
Would you get a brain implant yourselves if it meant bringing back the color? So
Right.
yes, over here where
Yes.
I am, and no over where Erik is on the pink row.
So I'm coming over here because I want to be
He's
on.
coming over here.
Yeah.
Okay, pink row is
Yeah, that's
no,
right. Yeah. Did you
I
get a
want
brain
4D
implant?
vision.
Oh, well,
and
some of
green
them are over
is
there.
yes to the
Yeah.
brain implant. Look at this. Look at this. I'm
Yes.
gonna hang out with you guys. My Twilight Zone episode still got me glitchy.
Yeah, you said you wouldn't have a brain implant, and I said I would. So, color
There you
vision
go.
to me is a pretty much superpower. So I'm
Color
yeah.
is
Oh,
a superpower.
yeah. Well, there we go,
Oh,
and
that's
we got
awesome.
some.
So,
That's
Erik,
super
I
fun.
think
Well,
I
and
think
Amy, just a reminder for our audience is this
Sure.
is what we did in our work on Afterville, on voting on how different things would be built in Afterville, and it was super fun to be able to do that, where we could discuss and make votes and stand up and be counted.
yes,
And again,
yeah,
this is
have a
just a great
voice.
reminder of what we did in Afterville, and that was great fun. So
Excellent.
cool. Well, we'll have to see with the virtual audience. We'll have to get a poll out in the world beyond.
Yes,
The
the other
see
side of the
see what
screen.
other people say about whether they would get a brain implant or not. Well, and
Yeah,
so Joe's saying, yeah, we'll be able to get a poll out for that. So.
yeah, we will. Excellent. Yeah, I think it's not as easy as saying yes or no. I really think it
Yep.
does need a conversation. It's a
Sure.
gray area, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
on whether or not we should be getting brain implants. Just because we can do the science, should we be messing with the science, and what are the ramifications of that? It's definitely
Absolutely.
a conversation that
And
we
that
should be
even
having.
applies to virtual reality itself. Again, Clark told it back in the beginning. The possibilities. We acknowledge that VR is so powerful. Well, power works in multiple ways, so it's not all an unalloyed good, right? So you mentioned cyber sickness from the beginning, and all these other possible adverse effects, which I've written about as well, and actually had clinical consultations about the after effects of cyberspace. So it's not innocuous, and we have to be careful. Make sure we give breaks. We've been going on for a long time already.
Yeah,
But
well,
it's
we're
been
about
super
to wrap
fun.
up
I'm
here.
sorry, it's so great to have this conversation.
No, it's fantastic. I want to thank everybody for coming out today, and thank you, Erik, for talking with us. And I hope you all consider this question on whether or not we should be messing with it, and whether or not you're ready to get a brain implant for the future. Thank you again, Erik, for joining us and telling us your story. It was an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you, Amy. And again, just stunning to be able to give a virtual reality experience with laser lights and changes of hearing. What's it like to be a deaf child? What's it like to have movement problems? What's it like to change from black and white vision to color vision? Just something that we couldn't do anywhere else. So just a brilliant experience. Thank you so much.
You are absolutely welcome. Thank you again. And from here on out, I'll see you on the other side.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Arthur C Clarke Presents metaFUTURES. Special thanks to Director Amy Winkler and our special guest, Dr. Erik Viirre. See you next time.